What if I told you that a 20-year-old kid, yes, a teenager barely old enough to grow a beard, looked at the most powerful empire on the face of the earth, an empire so massive it controlled millions of people across 3 continents, and said, I'm going to take all of it. Not half, not a piece, all of it, and then actually did it. That is not a movie. That is not a legend. That actually happened. And the man who did it was Alexander. And by the time this story is over, you will understand exactly why the entire ancient world was terrified of his name. In 334 BC, Alexander, king of Macedonia, began one of the greatest military campaigns in history against the superpower of the age, the Persian Empire. Just 20 years old, his brilliant and fearless leadership won him battle after battle. And in an astonishing 10-year campaign that took him to the edge of the known world, he carved out one of the largest empires ever known. Few men have had such a massive impact on the course of history. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed, but to the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. Now, before we get to Alexander himself, we need to understand the world he was born into, because without this context, you will never truly understand how insane his achievements actually were. Ancient Greece. From around 500 BC, this rugged land was the scene of remarkable developments in art, philosophy, and warfare. Its 2 greatest city-states were Athens, a naval power where democracy, art, drama, and philosophy flourished, and Sparta, cold, brutal, militaristic, a society so obsessed with war that they took boys from their mothers at age 7 and turned them into killing machines. In 480 BC, these 2 rival city-states had put aside their hatred of each other to fight an invasion by the mighty Persian Empire. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small Greek force led by just 300 Spartans held up an enormous Persian army for 3 days. 3 days against an army of hundreds of thousands, before they were finally encircled and killed to the last man, but not before making the Persians pay in blood for every single inch. Then in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet destroyed the Persian navy, but they could not prevent the Persians burning the sacred temples of the Athenian Acropolis, an act of destruction that the Greeks would never forget and never forgive. The next year at Plataea, the Greeks won a decisive land battle and forced the Persians to abandon their invasion entirely. The next 50 years were the golden age of classical Greece. Art, philosophy, architecture, democracy, everything that the modern world considers civilized came from this 50-year window. But here's the thing about great powers: they cannot stop fighting each other. Rising tension between Athens and Sparta eventually exploded into war, dragging the entire Greek world into decades of catastrophic, exhausting, pointless fighting. Wars between the Greek city-states continued for almost a century, leaving them broken, bleeding, and dangerously vulnerable to a new power rising in the north. And this is where the story gets interesting. For centuries, the sophisticated Greeks had looked down on the mountainous kingdom of Macedonia as a backwater, a primitive, barely Greek hillbilly kingdom not worth taking seriously. But then came King Philip II, Alexander's father, and everything changed. Philip was a military genius who completely revolutionized warfare. His most famous innovation was the sarissa, an 18-foot pike, twice the length of a normal Greek spear, wielded by trained infantry fighting in a tight formation called the phalanx. Imagine a wall of iron spear tips 18 feet long coming in. There was no answer to it. In 338 BC at the Battle of Gaugamela, Philip's army crushed the combined forces of Thebes and Athens like they were nothing. Through a combination of alliance, conquest, and sheer military dominance, Philip united all of Greece under his command in what became known as the Hellenic League, with himself as supreme commander. Only Sparta, proud, stubborn, unbreakable Sparta, refused to join. Philip now began planning something massive, a pan-Hellenic war against the Persian Empire. Their old enemy was aging, weakening, its legendary wealth just sitting there waiting to be taken. But on the very eve of launching his greatest campaign, Philip was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards at his own daughter's wedding. The murder was brutal, sudden, and deeply suspicious. Some historians believe Alexander's own mother may have been involved. Nobody knows the full truth. What we do know is this: the man who inherited Philip's throne, his army, and his dream of conquering Persia was his 20-year-old son Alexander. Brilliant, restless, tutored personally by the philosopher Aristotle, and already bloodied in battle. But here is what most people don't realize about Alexander. Before he could even think about invading Persia, he had to survive his own kingdom first. The moment Philip died, enemies appeared everywhere. Rivals to the throne were immediately executed. Rebellions broke out in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece. Alexander crushed every single one with terrifying speed. And then, to send a message to anyone still thinking about challenging him, he made a special example of the ancient city of Thebes. He completely destroyed it, leveled it to the ground, and sold every surviving citizen into slavery. The message was received. Nobody challenged Alexander again. In the spring of 334 BC, now ready, Alexander led his army of 40,000 soldiers across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, and history was never the same again. His army was extraordinary. In the front rank, 9,000 Macedonian phalangites, professional soldiers armed with those devastating 18-foot sarissa pikes, fighting in a phalanx 16 ranks deep. A solid, moving wall of iron that was virtually unstoppable in a frontal assault. But here's the weakness nobody talks about. The phalanx was almost impossible to maneuver quickly and completely vulnerable to attacks on its flanks or rear. So 3,000 elite infantry, called the hypaspists, the shield bearers, guarded its sides. Behind them, 7,000 Greek allies and 5,000 mercenaries. Skirmishers from Thrace and Illyria armed with javelins, slings, and bows. And the most feared unit in the entire army, the companion cavalry. 1,800 elite horsemen armed with spear and sword. Alexander himself led their royal squadron in person. This was not a king who watched battles from a hill. This was a king who led from the absolute front. The Persian satraps, the governors of Asia Minor, gathered to discuss how to stop this invasion. A brilliant Greek general named Memnon of Rhodes, fighting in Persian service, gave them perfect advice. Do not fight Alexander directly. Burn everything. Destroy the crops. Withdraw deep into the interior. Alexander's army will starve before it ever reaches the heartland. It was the right strategy. It might have worked, but the satraps refused. They were not willing to destroy their own provinces without a fight. Pride over strategy. It would cost them everything. They chose to face Alexander at the river Granicus, positioning their cavalry along the far bank, with thousands of Greek mercenary infantry in reserve behind. On paper, it looked strong. In reality, it was a trap they had set for themselves. Alexander, characteristically ignoring every cautious instinct, ordered an immediate attack without waiting for dawn. He sent his cavalry crashing across the river strait into a hail of javelins, darts, and arrows. Horses crashed against horses. Men were jammed against men. The fighting was savage, close, and brutal. And then Alexander himself was nearly killed. Persian noble Rhoesus struck him on the head with a sword so hard it broke his helmet. Alexander killed him with a lance. Then from behind, Spithridates raised his sword for the killing blow, but a Macedonian officer named Black Clitus cut off his entire sword arm before landing. Alexander survived by seconds, but by now the Macedonian phalanx had crossed the river, and once that wall of 18-foot spears arrived, the Persian cavalry had no answer. Most turned and fled. The Greek mercenaries, who had not even had time to enter the battle, found themselves completely surrounded. Alexander, either in a blood rage or viewing them as traitors for fighting against fellow Greeks, ignored their pleas for mercy. They were massacred to the last man. Asia Minor now lay open before him, but the Persian Empire was still vast, wealthy, and dangerous. And now it was mobilizing everything it had. Because the next time Alexander faced a Persian army, it would not be satraps making bad decisions. It would be Darius himself, the King of Kings, with an army that outnumbered Alexander's nearly 2-1. At a narrow coastal plain near a place called Issus, the two greatest armies of the ancient world would finally collide, and what happened next would shock the entire world. Darius had up to 100,000 soldiers, including his legendary personal guard, the 10,000 Immortals. He chose the narrow battlefield deliberately, thinking it would force Alexander to fight without room to maneuver. What he did not understand was that Alexander did not need room to maneuver. Alexander needed a target, and Darius had just made himself one. Alexander deployed his army exactly as before, Parmenion commanding the left, the phalanx in the center, and Alexander himself on the right with the companions and his best troops. When the battle began, Alexander's charge was so fast and so violent that the Persian left wing collapsed almost immediately. But in the center, the Macedonian phalanx ran into trouble. Fighting Darius's Greek mercenaries, the formation became disordered, and for a terrifying moment, the phalanx was actually being pushed back. Alexander saw the danger, regrouped instantly, and led the companions in a headlong charge directly at the Persian center. The mercenaries broke, the phalanx recovered and pushed forward again, and then Alexander drove straight toward Darius himself. This is the moment that decided everything. Face to face with a screaming, blood-soaked Macedonian king charging directly at him at full gallop, Darius broke. The King of Kings turned his royal chariot around and fled the battlefield. The moment his troops saw their king running, the entire Persian army collapsed. The battle became a massacre. One Macedonian commander reported that there were so many Persian dead that his men used the bodies to fill a ravine so they could cross over it. Among the spoils of victory were Darius's own wife, mother, and 3 children, all captured alive. Alexander treated them with complete respect and dignity. A small detail, but one that told the entire ancient world something important about who this young king really was. With the Persian field army shattered and Darius fleeing east, Alexander turned to systematically dismantling the Western Persian Empire. In 332 BC, the coastal cities of Phoenicia submitted, ending Persian naval power in the Mediterranean forever. But the island city of Tyre, confident behind its sea walls, refused. Alexander built a causeway to the island, protected it with giant siege towers, and after 7 brutal months breached the walls and took the city. Most of its citizens were killed or enslaved. Gaza fell next, then Egypt, where the Persian governor surrendered the entire country without a single battle, and the ancient priests of Egypt welcomed Alexander not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, crowning him pharaoh. At the mouth of the Nile, he founded a new city, Alexandria, a city that still exists today, carrying his name more than 2,300 years later. But Alexander was not finished. He was never finished. Darius had sent him a letter offering peace, gold, his daughter's hand in marriage, and half the Persian Empire. Half of the greatest empire in the world. Alexander rejected it without hesitation. He did not want half. He was coming to take it all. And now he marched east toward a place called Gaugamela, near what is today Mosul in Iraq, where Darius had assembled his greatest army yet. Between 50,000 and 80,000 soldiers. Cavalry from Armenia, India, and Central Asia. 200 Saifa chariots, even war elephants, on flat, carefully prepared ground that Darius had personally chosen to maximize his numerical advantage. This was meant to be Alexander's end. This was meant to be the battle that finally stopped the unstoppable. What happened at Gaugamela would decide the fate of the entire ancient world. And the story of what Alexander did next is one of the most breathtaking moments in the history of human warfare.